Hola amigos, ¿qué tal? Stuart here from Spain Speaks with an update video today, bit of a feedback video. Go through some of the feedback from yesterday's video, some of the comments, some of the things that people were speaking about, and have a bit of a chat about what's going on in the country at the moment. Now, as you know, there's been a lot of talk in recent times about schools starting up again. I think the title of yesterday's video was that Spain is going to have an uncertain autumn. Lots of people still worried about what the health situation is going to be like in coming months, and of course lots of negative information being pushed forward by the mainstream media at the moment. There's been a couple of protests in recent times. People in Madrid, for example, have taken to the streets protesting against their lack of freedom, of course. The usual slogans, of course, the usual theories, a lot of different theories and ideas crossing over, really blurring the lines. But there were a few hundred people out and about yesterday protesting in Madrid, and I'm sure there will be more protests the longer this thing goes on for, because as we all know, nobody knows when it's going to end. Now, in yesterday's video, the topic of ocupas came up. If you don't know, ocupas are squatters, and according to some press in Spain, there is a problem with squatters at the moment. People getting their homes occupied by squatters, difficult to get them out. But there was an article in El País newspaper that said that ocupas aren't the big problem that many people think that they are. And we had a couple of comments from people saying that they have direct experience with ocupas, saying that they know people or that they had property that was occupied by squatters and it was difficult to get them out. So obviously the problem does exist, but I don't know how widespread it is. I have heard that one of the big problems with squatters in Spain is with homes that are owned by the banks, empty homes, homes that were never occupied, homes that were never finished or sold when the housing bubble crisis hit back in 2008, 2009. There were lots of homes that were sometimes 3/4 finished or maybe even fully completed, and of course they were empty, and of course people moved into those homes looking for accommodation, but they belonged to the banks. And I think there's a lot of talk about ocupas at the moment because of the government that we currently have in Spain. Of course, the political party Podemos is in government at the moment, and of course some of their talk, some of their rhetoric over the years has been pro-squatters, especially if buildings are abandoned. In fact, I think in the past they actually have encouraged people to occupy homes that are owned by banks. And in some cities the problem is worse than others. For example, in Barcelona, I know that there has been a problem with squatters or ocupas over the years. I remember a few years ago I had a student whose job it was to get ocupas out of these bank-owned homes. That's what the banks used to pay him to do. He was sort of a middleman between the banks in Spain and the new owners, which were normally hedge funds, and his job was to try to get the squatters out, offering them some type of incentive, maybe some type of economic incentive. I don't think he ever told me that he used force to get people out, but I remember him saying that back in the day, this was around 2014, 2015, that a lot of those bank-owned homes were taken over by squatters. And I think we also need to distinguish between squatters that move into empty homes or vacant homes, or people that become squatters when they stop paying rent. So they move into a home legally with a rental contract, and then they stop paying rent after 3, 4, 5, 6 months. And I think in that case, it is very difficult to get people out. And a lot of the stories that I have heard or read about in newspapers relate to that type of squatting. But as we saw in that video yesterday, according to judges, if your house is vacant and squatters move in, there is a fairly easy process to get them out. But again, people said that it's not an easy process, so I'm not really sure what the situation is at the moment regarding squatters. And to be honest, I wouldn't like to have to deal with the problem. And another thing we mentioned yesterday was this proposed merger between two of Spain's banks, La Caixa and Bankia. And of course, if they do merge, it will become the biggest bank in Spain. Now, over the last 10 years or so, the situation in Spanish banks has changed enormously. There's been lots of mergers, lots of banks have disappeared. And of course, Bankia, as I mentioned yesterday, was the result of various bad savings banks joining together, merging together in order to save the banks, and the biggest bank in that group, of course, being Caja Madrid. Caja Madrid was one of the biggest savings banks in Spain, very badly managed throughout the 2000s, virtually bankrupt, and it merged with a lot of other dodgy little savings banks. And La Caixa is the big Catalan bank. Now, anybody who was in Spain during the 2008, 2009, 2010 financial crisis will obviously know the Bankia story. There was a scandal there involving the illegal use of credit cards. There was a scandal when they tried to take the company public, tried to put it onto the stock market, and of course the former president ended up in prison, and another former president committed suicide, I think, while hunting. And lots of banks in Spain have disappeared over the last 10 years. I think 12 years ago Spain had 52 banks, and now they're down to about 8. Some of the big banks also disappeared. Banks like Banesto, Banco Popular was one of the last banks to disappear, also a scandal involving that bank. So the banking system in Spain has seen better days. There's been lots and lots of consolidation, and of course more consolidation forecast. And it's going to be interesting to see whether the current banks can withstand this current situation. And I'm sure that the big ones will. I'm sure that Banco Santander won't have a problem. I'm sure that BBVA won't have a problem. I'm sure that CaixaBank won't have a problem. Sabadell, but there are still a few dodgy banks in Spain, so we'll see how they end up. And there's also been a bit of talk in Spain in recent times about the autonomous community system, whether it's the best system for Spain. A lot of people saying that perhaps they need to go back to a more centralized system, and I don't know whether people agree with that or not. A lot of people seem to think that centralized governments or unitary governments handle situations like the one that we have at the moment better. I don't know. Maybe federal systems are a bit more complicated and you need a single government in order to get things done better. And the thing about Spain, as we know, is that it's a very complicated system. It's not really a federal state, it's not really a unitary state, it's a decentralized unitary state, if that makes sense, or at least that's what they call it. And of course, as we've seen, things can be quite chaotic in the autonomous communities trying to get everything to work together. So what is the best system and what is the best system for Spain? So on that note, I'll start to wrap the video up. A bit of a shorter video today. Questions or comments, please leave them in the section below. Debate the situation out as you normally do. Give the video a thumbs up if you liked it, thumbs down if you didn't. I'll see you in the next one. Hasta luego.